It's impossible to explain how your entire life can change in a single moment. But it did for me one cold Monday afternoon. I had just gotten off work, exhausted but relieved the day was over. I wasn't expecting what I came home to. My wife, Emma, was sitting at the dining room table, her eyes red from what I could only guess was hours of crying. She had this look on her face like she was waiting for a bomb to go off, and maybe she was. I hadn't even taken off my shoes when she said it, the words that detonated everything I thought I knew about us. "I've been sleeping with Professor Carson," she said, her voice trembling. I couldn't believe it at first. I literally thought I misheard her. I stood there, frozen, like an idiot. It felt like everything stopped. The air sucked out of the room. Emma, the woman I had spent the last 7 years of my life with, the woman I trusted more than anyone, had betrayed me. "I didn't want to," she added, almost as if it would soften the blow. "He's my thesis advisor. He's been pressuring me for months, threatening to fail me if I didn't." My heart pounded so loudly in my ears I barely heard her. Pressured? Threatened? This was not how I imagined our marriage would fall apart. It felt like the ground beneath me was crumbling, but a part of me, against my better judgment, wanted to believe her. Was this some kind of manipulation? Did she really feel cornered? But it wasn't enough to justify it. How could it be? I sat down across from her, struggling to breathe normally. "Emma," I said, "why didn't you tell me sooner? Why now?" My voice sounded hollow, foreign. She stared at the table, avoiding my gaze. "Because I couldn't live with the lie anymore. I wanted to. I had to tell you the truth. I'm sorry, Jake. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't say anything. I just sat there, numb, staring at the woman I loved. It didn't matter if she was pressured. She still did it. And now everything we had was tainted. But before I could figure out what to say next, Emma did something I didn't expect. She didn't beg for forgiveness. She didn't throw out excuses. Instead, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "I want us to get revenge." "Revenge? Revenge?" I echoed, barely able to process the word. My mind was still spinning from her confession. And now this? I was stuck somewhere between disbelief and outrage. "What are you even talking about, Emma?" Her hands were trembling as she wiped at her tear-streaked cheeks. She seemed more desperate now, like she had thought this plan through 100 times in her mind before finally bringing it to me. "Jake, he thinks he can do whatever he wants. He's been doing this for years with other students, and nobody ever talks about it. I wasn't his first. I know that. He's untouchable at the university because no one ever has proof." I sat back, my arms crossed. I didn't know what to say. "So you want to, what? Ruin him?" Emma nodded, her eyes flickering with a strange kind of determination. "Yes, he deserves it. I'll record everything. We can expose him, destroy his reputation." I could feel anger boiling in me. Part of it was directed at her, but a much larger part was directed at this man, this professor, who thought he could use his position to manipulate and destroy lives. The other part of me, though, it was terrified. Emma was asking me to dive headfirst into something that could explode in our faces. This wasn't just about her cheating anymore. It was about destroying someone's career, maybe even worse. "And what happens to us?" I asked quietly. "What does any of this do for us? You cheated, Emma. You let it happen." Her face crumbled at my words, but she didn't look away. "I know," she whispered, "and I'll live with that every day. But if we don't do something, he'll keep doing this. He'll ruin more people's lives. We can stop him, Jake." I stared at her, the woman I had loved for years, now a stranger sitting across from me, plotting some grand revenge. The thought of Professor Carson's smug face, believing he could get away with it all, infuriated me. And as much as I hated to admit it, Emma's plan made a twisted kind of sense. We had nothing left to lose. But still, this wasn't US. Was it? "I don't know, Emma," I muttered, running my hands through my hair, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on me. This could backfire. What if it doesn't work? What if they don't believe you? She grabbed my hands, her eyes wide, pleading. "That's why we'll make sure they have to believe us. You just have to trust me. Trust her. The irony of that nearly made me laugh, but there was no humor left in me. Not after today. How would this even work? I finally asked, my voice sounding more defeated than I wanted it to. We get him on video, she said, her voice steadying as if she'd rehearsed this a million times. I'll meet with him, wear a wire. He'll think I'm still under his control. Once we get him to admit what he's done, how he's manipulated me and others, we'll send it to the university board, the media, everything. He'll be finished. It sounded insane. It was insane. But what did I have left? The woman I thought I knew was gone, replaced by someone desperate, and the life we had built together was crumbling before my eyes. Okay, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Okay, we'll do it. She let out a breath she must have been holding for what felt like hours, squeezing my hands tighter. For a brief moment, it felt like we were in this together, like maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of fixing what was broken between us. But I was wrong. This was just the beginning of a much darker path than I could have ever imagined. The days following Emma's confession were unbearable. Every time I looked at her, I saw the betrayal. The image of her with someone else burned into my mind like a scar I couldn't heal. Yet, we were bound together now by something even more toxic: revenge. She spent hours preparing, researching everything she could about wiretapping laws and how to use recording devices discreetly. It was eerie watching her shift into this hyper-focused state, almost mechanical in her resolve to destroy Professor Carson. I, on the other hand, was barely keeping myself together. Half of me wanted to end us, but the other half, the angrier half, wanted to see this through. It was a cold Thursday when Emma finally said she was ready. I'll meet him in his office tomorrow after class, she said, not even looking up from the small hidden camera she was fiddling with. He's already suggested we talk again. This will be it. He won't see it coming. There was a chill that ran down my spine at the way she spoke, so casual yet deadly. I wasn't sure who she was anymore. The woman sitting in front of me, preparing to take down a man who had wronged her, didn't resemble the Emma I married 7 years ago. And maybe I wasn't the same man either. Jake, are you okay? She asked, noticing the distant look on my face. I shook my head, trying to pull myself together. Yeah, I'm fine. It's just, are you sure this will work? She looked up, her eyes locking onto mine. Yes, he's cocky. He won't suspect a thing. And once we have him on tape, we'll send it straight to the board. I nodded, though unease twisted my stomach into knots. I didn't have a choice but to trust her now. We were too deep into this. What do you need me to do? Emma stood up, walking over to me with a small, almost apologetic smile. Just be there when I get home. I'll need you after. That stung more than I thought it would. After she was done playing this twisted game with the man who had destroyed our marriage. She still needed me, even after everything. The next morning, I sat in our kitchen with a cup of coffee that I couldn't bring myself to drink. Emma had left early, dressed in a way that made me sick to my stomach, like she was going on a date. But I knew why she was doing it. Carson wouldn't expect her to look like she was coming to fight. He would expect her to be weak, vulnerable, and compliant like all the other students he had manipulated over the years. I hated that she had to play into his sick fantasy to make this work. Hours passed like molasses. I found myself pacing, checking my phone, and staring out the window like I was waiting for something bad to happen. My thoughts spiraled in 1,000 directions. What if Carson didn't take the bait? What if something went wrong? What if he hurt her? Finally, my phone buzzed. It was Emma. A single text. It's done. I'm coming home. I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. She was okay. It was over. Or at least I thought it was. When she walked through the door, I could see it in her eyes. Something had shifted. She wasn't crying. She wasn't trembling. She looked calm. Too calm. Did you get it? I asked, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet house. Emma nodded, pulling out the tiny camera from her bag and setting it on the kitchen table. Every word. He admitted to everything, how he's done this with other students, how he uses his power to get what he wants. We've got him, Jake. For a split second, I felt a rush of relief. We had him. He was finished. But there was something off about the way Emma was acting. Too composed for someone who had just been through what she had. "Are you okay?" I asked, searching her face for any sign of the guilt or pain she had shown before. She smiled, an empty, detached smile. "I am now." I didn't know how to respond. This was it. The man who had ruined everything was about to get what he deserved. But for some reason, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like something was still missing. Something dark that hadn't surfaced yet. But before I could think too much, Emma's next words shattered the brief sense of triumph I had. "There's one more thing, Jake," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. He said something else before I left. I felt my chest tighten. "What?" "He laughed," she said, her expression darkening. "He laughed and said no one would care, that even if I went to the university, they'd protect him. He's not worried at all." I stood up, anger surging through me like fire. "So, what do we do now?" Emma hesitated, her eyes flickering with something I couldn't quite read. Then, with a cold certainty, she said, "We show the world who he really is." It was in that moment I realized we were about to take this further than I had ever imagined. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about destruction. And the scariest part? I wasn't sure if I could stop it. We were spiraling. That much was clear. Emma was obsessed now, driven by a need to ruin Professor Carson in a way that would leave him with nothing. Exposing him to the university board wasn't enough for her. After his casual admission that he had no fear of consequences, it lit a new fire in her. It wasn't about justice anymore. It was about revenge, pure and simple. I was still struggling to process it all. My wife had betrayed me, and now we were scheming together to destroy the man who had taken advantage of her. The lines between guilt and vengeance were blurring fast, and I didn't know where we were going to land when this was over. 2 days after the wiretapping, Emma came to me with the next phase of her plan. Her expression was eerily calm, like she was in control of everything. And maybe she was, but I wasn't. "I've thought about it," she began, pacing back and forth in our living room. "Carson's not just worried about his job. He's worried about his reputation. We need to hit him where it hurts the most." I raised an eyebrow, still feeling like I was playing catch-up to her thought process. "And how do we do that?" Emma stopped pacing and looked directly at me, a glint of something sharp in her eyes. "We embarrass him, publicly. We make sure everyone sees him for the disgusting predator he is." It didn't take long for her to outline her plan. The university was holding a faculty dinner the next weekend. Carson would be there, of course, in his usual spot as one of the most well-regarded professors in his department. But Emma wasn't interested in simply confronting him at the dinner. No, that was too simple. She wanted to humiliate him in front of everyone. "I'll wear the camera again," she said, her voice taking on an almost chilling excitement. "I'll lure him into thinking he still has control over me. Get him to say something incriminating. And then, at the right moment, we'll expose him. Right in front of the entire faculty." I sat there, my mind racing. It was one thing to catch him admitting to his abuse of power, but to deliberately embarrass him in front of his colleagues. This was a whole new level of risky. "This is dangerous, Emma," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "He's not stupid. He'll know something's up if you're too obvious." Emma shrugged, unfazed. "I know him better than you think. He's arrogant. He'll think he still has me under his thumb. He won't see it coming." There was no stopping her now. I could see it in her eyes. This wasn't just about me, or our marriage, or even Carson anymore. Emma needed this. It was the only way she could reclaim some sense of power over what had been done to her. As much as I hated the situation, part of me understood. "I'll be there," I said finally, my voice low. "But I don't like it." Emma just smiled, as if she already knew I would agree. "It'll be over soon, Jake. Then we can move on." But could we? That was the question that kept nagging at me. Could we really move on from all of this? I wasn't sure. The night of the faculty dinner came faster than I expected. I had spent the whole week feeling like I was walking around with a time bomb strapped to my chest. Every time Emma talked about her plan, I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me, choking me. The university's banquet hall was grand, the kind of place where you could feel out of place if you weren't wearing a suit worth more than your monthly salary. Emma had dressed the part. Sleek, confident, a vision of grace and charm. But I knew the truth. Underneath the surface, she was ready to tear Carson apart. I wasn't sure how we were going to pull this off. The faculty dinner was a formal event, full of stuffy professors and their spouses mingling under the chandelier's glow. We were two wolves hiding in sheep's clothing, biding our time until the right moment to strike. Carson was there, as expected, chatting with other professors, smiling that smug, arrogant smile that made my skin crawl. I hated how easy everything seemed for him, how untouchable he felt in this world of academia. But he didn't know what was coming. Emma had convinced him earlier in the week that she needed to talk, that she had changed her mind about ending things between them. She played him like a master manipulator, ensuring he would be at this dinner, expecting to meet her afterward for one last conversation. I watched from a distance as Emma approached him, her demeanor calm, her voice soft but steady. I couldn't hear what she said, but I saw the way Carson's eyes flicked to her with that sick, knowing smile. He thought he had won. He thought she was still under his control. It made my blood boil. Emma lingered near him throughout the evening, positioning herself perfectly for the moment we had planned. She was wearing the camera again, concealed in her necklace, ready to capture everything. All we needed was the right opening. And then it happened. During a lull in the evening, when the chatter had died down and most of the guests were focused on their meals, Emma stepped toward the podium where the dean was preparing to make a closing speech. Her hands trembled slightly, but her expression remained steely as she spoke into the microphone. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she began, her voice echoing through the hall. Every head turned to look at her, confusion etched on their faces. "But there's something everyone here needs to know." Carson's smile faltered. He looked at her, confusion quickly morphing into panic as he realized what was happening. "This man," Emma said, pointing directly at Carson, "has been using his position to manipulate and coerce female students for years. I have proof. I was one of them." The room fell silent, the only sound the faint buzz of the microphone as Emma's words hung in the air like a dark cloud. The shocked faces of the faculty, the whispers that began spreading like wildfire. It was everything we had hoped for. But the look on Carson's face, that was something I hadn't expected. He wasn't just panicked. He was furious. And then, the moment that shocked everyone, including me, Carson, in a desperate attempt to stop the unraveling, stood up and shouted, "You think anyone's going to believe you? I'll sue you for defamation. You're nothing. No one will take your side." But Emma, without missing a beat, simply pressed play on her phone. The room filled with Carson's voice from the recording. His own words, the ones where he admitted to preying on students, laughing at how no one would ever stop him, echoed through the hall. The collective gasp that followed was deafening. Carson's face went pale, his eyes wide with disbelief as his colleagues stared at him, horrified. He had no defense left. No more lies. For a split second, I thought we had won. But that was before everything spiraled completely out of control. Before the revenge turned into something much darker, something I could never have prepared for. The silence in the banquet hall was suffocating, like the calm before a storm. For a brief moment, everything was still. The entire room seemed frozen in shock, processing what they had just heard, Carson's own vile words playing back on a loop, condemning him with each syllable. And then chaos erupted. Carson tried to rush toward Emma, his face twisted in a mask of rage. "You, how dare you?" he bellowed, his voice cracking with a mix of fury and desperation. Two faculty members grabbed him before he could get too close, restraining him as he thrashed wildly, screaming accusations of lies and slander. It was pathetic. But as I watched this unfold, my chest tightened. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. We had planned for the public exposure, sure, but not for this. Not for Carson losing all control, for the raw anger that now filled the room. Security quickly descended upon him, pulling him out of the hall as he cursed and spat at Emma. The guests looked stunned, whispering in disbelief, some with their phones already recording what was happening, capturing the professor's humiliating meltdown. Emma stood frozen, gripping the microphone stand, her face expressionless. I thought she'd look victorious, but instead, she seemed detached, almost like she was in a trance. And as much as I wanted to celebrate what we had just done, something didn't feel right. When Carson was finally dragged out of the hall, the murmurs grew louder. People began gathering in small groups, whispering, shocked eyes darting between Emma and the door. The dean of the university, clearly at a loss for words, stepped to the microphone and awkwardly called the evening to a close. Emma stayed motionless, her eyes fixed on the spot where Carson had stood moments ago. I made my way through the crowd, grabbing her hand, trying to pull her out of this daze. Emma, we need to go, I whispered urgently, my heart still racing from the adrenaline. We did it. Let's get out of here. She didn't resist as I led her out of the hall and into the cold night air. The silence between us was suffocating, filled with 1,000 unspoken thoughts. This was the moment we had been waiting for, his public downfall. And yet, it felt hollow. When we got into the car, Emma finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought it would feel different. I glanced at her, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. What do you mean? She stared out the window, her reflection a ghost of the person she had once been. I thought, after we did this, I'd feel relief. But I don't. It's like, it's not enough. Her words hung in the air, and that's when it hit me. This wasn't about Carson anymore. This was about us. We had tried to use revenge as a way to heal what had been broken between us, but all it had done was leave us more fractured. Emma, I began cautiously. We did what we came to do. He's ruined now. Everyone knows what he is. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked down at her hands, her fingers trembling slightly. I ruined us first, Jake. Her admission felt like a knife to my chest. As much as I had tried to push it aside, the truth was always there, lurking beneath the surface. No amount of revenge could change the fact that Emma had broken something between us the moment she crossed that line with Carson. The man was a monster, yes, but she had still chosen to go along with it, no matter the pressure. I know, I finally said, my voice low. But what now? She turned to me then, tears welling in her eyes. I don't know, she whispered. I thought this would fix it. I thought, if we took him down together, it would somehow bring us back. But I can't undo what I did. I looked away, unable to face the raw emotion in her eyes. I had told myself that revenge would give me some closure, some satisfaction. But now that it was done, I realized that nothing had changed. The weight of her betrayal still sat heavy in my chest. We should go home, I muttered, starting the engine. The drive was long and silent, filled only with the hum of the road beneath us. Emma stared out the window the entire time, lost in her thoughts, while I wrestled with mine. When we pulled into the driveway, I expected her to say something, to try to make sense of where we stood after everything. But she didn't. She just got out of the car and walked into the house without a word. Over the next few days, the story spread like wildfire. The video of Carson's meltdown at the faculty dinner made its way across social media, sparking outrage, disbelief, and public shaming. The university launched an immediate investigation, suspending him while they dug into the accusations Emma had laid out so publicly. He was done. His career was over. But at home, things were far from victorious. Emma and I barely spoke. The silence between us was heavier than before. She spent most of her time locked away in the study, staring blankly at her laptop or pacing the house like a ghost. I knew she was still grappling with everything that had happened, but I didn't know how to help her. I didn't even know if I wanted to. One evening, while I was sitting alone in the living room, Emma walked in, her face pale and drawn. She sat down across from me, her hands fidgeting in her lap. I need to tell you something, she said quietly, her voice barely audible. I looked up, bracing myself for whatever confession was about to come. What is it? Her eyes met mine, and I saw something there I hadn't seen before, fear. There's more, she whispered. About Carson. I felt my stomach drop. What do you mean, more? Emma hesitated, biting her lip before finally speaking. Before all of this, before I told you, I wasn't completely honest. He didn't just threaten to fail me, Jake. He made me believe that if I didn't do what he wanted, he would ruin my entire academic career. And I was scared. I thought if I didn't give in, I'd lose everything. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. She wasn't just saying this to excuse what she had done, was she? But the look in her eyes told me there was more to the story. I didn't fight him at first, she admitted, her voice trembling. I let it happen, and I hated myself for it, but I didn't know how to stop it. He had so much power over me. I felt sick. This wasn't what I had expected to hear. The betrayal felt even deeper now, not just because of what she had done, but because of how trapped she had felt. How desperate she must have been. Emma's confession landed like a second betrayal, compounding the wreckage of what was left of us. I sat there, speechless, trying to process what she had just told me. She wasn't the calculating, confident woman I had thought she was. She had been scared, terrified, even of losing everything she had worked for. And in her desperation, she had made choices that shattered both of our lives. But how was I supposed to feel about this now? Angry? Sympathetic? Betrayed again? I stood up, needing space, needing air. I need a minute, I muttered, barely able to get the words out as I walked toward the door, leaving her behind in the suffocating silence of the living room. Outside, the cool night air hit me like a slap. I leaned against the side of the house, my heart pounding, my mind spinning. Everything was unraveling. We had gone so far, plotted and executed a takedown of a man we both despised, and now this? She hadn't told me the full truth from the start. That sick feeling of betrayal resurfaced, but mixed in with it was pity, empathy, confusion. I wasn't ready to deal with the mess of emotions swirling inside me, so I stayed outside for what felt like hours. I stared up at the stars, hoping they'd offer some sort of answer, but they remained indifferent, cold, just like everything else in my life right now. When I finally went back inside, Emma was still sitting where I had left her, staring blankly at the floor. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes filled with uncertainty, fear. I sat down across from her, the weight of everything crushing down on me. "What now, Emma?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "What do you want from me?" She blinked, as if the question caught her off guard. "I don't know," she whispered. "I never thought it would go this far. I thought I could control it. But I've lost everything, Jake. And I've dragged you down with me." I stared at her, the woman who had once been my entire world, now a stranger sitting in front of me, broken and unsure. There was a long pause before I finally asked the question that had been burning in my mind since she confessed everything. "Why didn't you tell me the full truth from the beginning?" My voice shook with a mixture of frustration and pain. "You said he pressured you, but you didn't tell me how. You made it seem like you were a willing participant." Emma flinched at the harshness of my words, her eyes filling with tears. "Because I was ashamed," she said, her voice cracking. "I didn't want you to look at me the way you're looking at me now. I didn't want to admit how weak I felt, how powerless I was. I thought if I could just take him down, it would make me feel whole again. But it didn't." Her words hung heavy in the air, and for the first time, I saw her not as my betrayer, but as a victim, too. A victim of this twisted man's manipulation, his abuse of power. But the damage was already done. I couldn't unhear what she had told me, couldn't erase the images that plagued my mind. "And what about us?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What happens to us now?" Emma looked at me, her tears falling freely now. "I don't know if we can fix this, Jake. I want to, I do. But I've hurt you so much. I don't even know how to begin making it right." I didn't know either. Part of me wanted to hold her, to comfort her in the face of everything she had endured. But the other part of me, the part that still bore the scars of her betrayal, couldn't bring itself to forgive her. I had trusted her with everything, and she had kept this dark secret from me, choosing revenge over honesty. We sat there in silence for what felt like an eternity, both of us too broken to know how to move forward. I knew that no matter what we did from here, nothing would ever be the same again. The following weeks were a blur. The fallout from the faculty dinner continued to ripple across the university. Professor Carson's reputation was in ruins, and several other students came forward with stories of harassment and coercion, validating everything Emma had exposed. The university launched a formal investigation, and Carson was suspended indefinitely. But the victory felt hollow. Emma and I barely spoke, our relationship hanging by a thread. We went through the motions of everyday life, work, bills, the occasional forced conversation about logistics, but the emotional distance between us was palpable. I could feel it growing wider with each passing day, and I didn't know how to stop it. One night, as I sat alone in the living room, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from an anonymous sender. Frowning, I opened it, not expecting anything significant. But as I read the message, my blood ran cold. It was from one of the other students who had come forward against Carson. The email detailed an encounter she had with him, a similar story of manipulation and threats. But at the bottom of the email, there was a sentence that made my heart stop. Carson kept a folder of blackmail material on several students and faculty members. He told me about it once, said it was his way of staying in control. I don't know where it is, but I thought you should know. I sat there, my mind racing. Blackmail? A folder? If this was true, Carson wasn't just using his power to manipulate students. He had dirt on people. People who might be willing to protect him to keep their own secrets safe. This wasn't over. Without thinking, I ran upstairs to find Emma. She was in bed, staring at her phone, clearly not expecting me to barge in like I did. "Jake?" she asked, startled. "What's going on?" I showed her the email, my heart still pounding in my chest. Carson has blackmail material. He's got dirt on people. That's why he wasn't worried about being exposed. He's been using it to protect himself. Emma's eyes widened as she read the message. But he's ruined now. What could he possibly do with it? I shook my head, feeling the weight of this new revelation. I don't know, but if he has leverage on people in the university, this could get even uglier than we thought. Emma stared at the screen, her face pale. "What are we supposed to do?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But we need to find that folder before someone else does." For the first time in weeks, we were on the same page again, united by the same goal. But as we sat there, staring at that email, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something much darker. Over the next few days, Emma and I worked together to try and uncover any leads about Carson's blackmail stash. We reached out to a few of the students who had come forward, asking discreet questions, but no one had heard of the folder. It felt like chasing shadows, like we were hunting for something that might not even exist. But then, something unexpected happened. One evening, as we were sitting in the kitchen, my phone buzzed with a call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered cautiously, not knowing who it could be. "Jake?" The voice on the other end said. It was Professor Carson. I froze, the air around me suddenly feeling suffocating. "How did you get this number?" I demanded, my voice shaking with anger. Carson chuckled darkly. "That's not important. What matters is that you and your wife have made a grave mistake. You think this is over, but you have no idea what I'm capable of." My heart pounded in my chest as he spoke, every word dripping with malice. "What do you want?" "I want you to understand something," Carson continued, his voice eerily calm. "I've been collecting secrets for years. Not just on students, but on faculty, administrators, even donors. I have enough dirt to bring down the entire university if I wanted to." I could barely breathe. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to know," Carson said, his voice turning cold. "I can ruin more than just careers. I can ruin lives. If you don't back off, if you keep digging, you'll find out just how far I'm willing to go." The line went dead. I stood there, phone still in hand, my mind racing. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed it, hit like and leave a comment with your favorite part. We'd love to hear your perspective.